Revenge stories today have changed. Some have become softer, others turn into massive action franchises. I'm looking at you, John Wick. They can still be fun, but they often lose that raw, uncomfortable edge the genre once had. So the only thing we can really do is wander back into the past. Today we're heading to the 1970s to look at revenge movies that probably wouldn't get made today. Michael Caine plays Jack Carter, a low-level London gangster who travels to Newcastle after his brother dies in what is supposed to be a car accident. Carter is convinced the accident was staged and that his brother was murdered, so he starts asking questions, trying to figure out who did it and why. The deeper he digs, the uglier things get. The investigation pulls him into a world of crime, exploitation, and violence. Without getting into the rest of the plot, this is a gritty crime noir that has aged extremely well. Michael Caine gives one of the strongest performances of his career, and the film is now widely considered a British classic. But it didn't start that way. The studio more or less buried it at the time. In the United States, it wasn't even released properly. MGM decided instead to remake the story as a blaxploitation film called Hitman instead of distributing the original. Critics back then also had trouble with it. Some were put off by the complicated plot and by Carter himself, who shows almost no remorse for what he does. But that's exactly the point. Carter isn't looking for redemption, he's looking for revenge. And if you like Michael Caine or hard-edged crime films from the 70s, Get Carter is absolutely worth your time. The last house on the left was marketed with the line, "To avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie, only a movie, only a movie." The story follows two teenage girls who go into the city for a concert. While trying to buy some marijuana, they run into a group of criminals who kidnap them. The gang takes them into the woods where the girls are humiliated, assaulted, and eventually murdered. Later, by pure chance, the killers end up at the home of one of the girls' parents. That's when the film turns into a revenge story. This is a grim exploitation film that people tend to either admire or completely reject. It's violent and very uncomfortable in places. Wes Craven later said that the film was meant to be uncompromising. His view was that art sometimes has to deal with things that exist in the real world, even when they are ugly. The movie caused a lot of controversy. In several countries it was banned or heavily censored. Even in the United States, theaters sometimes cut parts of the film before showing it. Lady Snowblood is based on a manga written by Kazuo Koike, the same writer behind Lone Wolf and Cub and Razor Hanzo. The story follows Yuki, played by Meiko Kaji. She is literally born for one purpose: revenge. Her mother gives birth to her in prison after her family is destroyed, hoping the child will one day avenge them. Yuki grows up and is trained for that mission by a priest named Dokai. From the very beginning, her life is aimed at tracking down the people responsible for her family's fate. The film belongs to a wave of female Yakuza movies that Japanese studios were producing at the time. It was popular enough to get a sequel the following year. The movie also had a clear influence on Quentin Tarantino when he made Kill Bill. The character of O-Ren Ishii echoes the story of Yuki, and the snowy setting of the final duel in Kill Bill is another obvious parallel. Tarantino also used Meiko Kaji's song Flower of Carnage during the finale of Kill Bill Volume 1. Compared with some other exploitation films of the period, this one plays closer to a traditional samurai story. There are still plenty of sword fights and bursts of blood, but the tone is more controlled. The music stands out, Meiko Kaji has a strong screen presence, and the ending is hard to forget. And let's take a look at another Japanese film, Sex and Fury. The film stars Reiko Ike and Christina Lindberg and sits somewhere between several different genres. The story follows Ocho, a gambling pickpocket and skilled swordswoman. When she is a child, she witnesses the murder of her father. Before dying, he manages to grab 3 Hanafuda playing cards from the men responsible. 20 years later, Ocho is traveling across Japan trying to find those 3 people and settle the score. Like many Japanese yakuza or samurai films, the journey brings other characters into the story along the way. At one point, Ocho becomes involved with an anarchist and a foreign spy, but at its core, the film is still a revenge story. There are sword fights, bursts of violence, and a fair amount of nudity. Despite the exploitation elements, Sex and Fury is visually striking. The colors are bold, the locations are carefully chosen, and the film often looks far more polished than people might expect from this type of movie. You can't really talk about movies of the 1970s without mentioning blaxploitation. One of the most famous examples is Coffy. The story follows Coffy, a nurse by day and a vigilante by night. She goes after drug dealers and the people behind the drug trade after her younger sister becomes addicted and ends up in a rehabilitation home. Pam Grier is the real highlight here. She completely carries the film and gives Coffy a lot of presence on screen. This was the movie that turned her into a star. Thriller A Cruel Picture is one of the more notorious films on this list. It was released under several titles in different countries, but many viewers know it as They Call Her One Eye. The story follows a young Swedish woman named Madeline, played by Christina Lindberg. As a child, she goes through a traumatic experience that leaves her mute. Years later, she is kidnapped by a sleazy pimp who pulls her into addiction and forces her into a life of exploitation. When she resists, the pimp punishes her by gouging out one of her eyes, but she refuses to stay a victim. Secretly, she begins preparing for revenge. Using the money she earns through prostitution, she pays for lessons in martial arts, driving, and firearms. Eventually, she sets out to track down the people responsible, armed with those new skills and a sawed-off shotgun. The film is known for its extreme content, including longer cuts that contained hardcore material, while other versions removed or shortened those scenes. Despite its low budget, the movie also shows a surprising level of craftsmanship. Director Bo Arne Vibenius had previously worked under Ingmar Bergman, and that influence can be felt in the camera work and editing. And if you're wondering where Quentin Tarantino got the inspiration for Elle Driver in Kill Bill, well, this film makes it pretty clear. Unlike most of the other films on this list, Theatre of Blood leans much more toward dark comedy. Vincent Price plays Edward Lionheart, a Shakespearean actor who decides to take revenge on the critics who denied him recognition and humiliated him. One by one, he tracks them down and kills them, staging each murder as a reference to a Shakespeare play. The tone is playful and very campy, and Vincent Price clearly enjoys every minute of it. He even said later that this was one of his favourite films. There is still plenty of blood and gore along the way, including one very memorable scene where a critic is made to eat his own pet poodles in a pie. If you enjoy Vincent Price or black comedies, Theatre of Blood is definitely worth watching. Rolling Thunder is one of the great unsung films of the 1970s. It follows a revenge story while also dealing with the alienation of Vietnam veterans returning home. The script was written by Paul Schrader, the same writer behind Taxi Driver. William Devane plays Major Charles Rain, a Vietnam prisoner of war who returns home after years of captivity. Along with fellow POW Johnny Voden, played by Tommy Lee Jones, he is welcomed back as a hero. But adjusting to normal life proves difficult. Rain's wife wants a divorce, and he struggles to reconnect with his young son. The town honors him with a silver dollar for every day he spent in captivity. But that gesture of respect soon leads to tragedy. A group of criminals breaks into his house to steal the coins. When Rain refuses to tell them where they are, they brutally torture him and destroy his hand using a garbage disposal. His wife and son are murdered, and Rain is left for dead. After recovering and now missing a hand, Rain begins tracking down the people responsible. With help from Voden, he sets out to take revenge. The film builds slowly, but the final confrontation is sudden and violent. The real highlight is Devane's performance. He keeps the character grounded and believable, showing a man who came home from war but never really left it behind. I Spit on Your Grave, also known as Day of the Woman, is one of the most controversial exploitation films ever made. It was banned or heavily cut in several countries and remains a movie that people either hate or defend. The story follows Jennifer, a writer from New York who travels to a quiet cabin in the countryside to work on her novel. While she is there, she encounters 4 local men who brutally attack her and destroy her manuscript. Over the next few days, she recovers and begins to take revenge on the men responsible. Critics reacted very strongly. Roger Ebert, for example, was one of the film's most famous detractors and argued that it carried disturbing moral implications. Because of that, the film has often been accused of misogyny. Others, however, see it differently and argue that the story ultimately becomes a revenge fantasy in which the heroine takes control and punishes the men who attacked her. Director Miyazaki later said the film grew out of his anger over real violence against women and that he wanted the story to end with the victim taking revenge on her attackers.